type in questions, I will do my best to be monitoring the chat function, and we'll dive right in. Simone, if you would be willing to advance the slides for me, I'd be very grateful. Maybe click to the next slide. So welcome. Yeah, if you haven't already done so, I saw many people have done this, but feel free to chat in your name and organization, and if you have multiple people in the room with you, great to get them down as well. I know this is something that we return to, and we try to understand who all's here, and that's helpful for us moving forward to do that. We can go ahead and move forward one slide. Right. So yeah, our agenda for today, as I said, is to reflect on our driver diagrams and to really dig into our local measures for improvement. We're gonna talk about building something called a measurement tree, which I hope will be relatively straightforward and understandable and helpful to you all on your improvement journeys. And then, of course, always we want lots of questions. So move forward one more slide for me. Great. And you know how I always like to return to our aim statement, and so we're here because we care about moving children and families out of poverty, and we have a very ambitious aim. We have a really ambitious aim of moving 10,000 children, 5,000 families out of poverty in about 3 years from now. And in the meantime, and in the next 1 year or so, we're looking to move 500 families into a place of greater stability and an increased income. And I think this is something that's going to require ingenuity. It's going to require collaboration and partnership, and it's going to require us to definitely learn from each other and work together if we are to be successful, as this is something that really has never been done before. And so just to bring us back to, this is an innovative space that we're trying to be in. Move forward one slide. So our last deliverable was the driver diagram, and I want to just pause here for a second and just invite you all into the conversation as I see more and more people logging in and typing in. But I would love for just a moment to I had an opportunity to look over so many of them, but I'd love for just a moment to pause and just ask for some reflections from people on the call. And Simone, I'm happy for people to be unmuted if that's helpful. But definitely would love to hear what it was like to make a driver diagram, what was the sort of social experience with your teams, and what did you feel like you were learning, uncovering, discovering as you moved through that?
Okay.
Well, it seems we've got 42 people who all are not yet ready to talk about their driver diagrams this morning, and that's okay. We will instead move forward with the content of the call, and if people do have an experience or a question about it, then we'll
I'll Brandon.
Yep.
Brandon. Hello?
Yep. Yes, hello.
Brandon. Okay, I'll talk about the key drivers diagram. It's Maria from Central Clinic.
Okay.
So I worked on it and kept making changes accordingly, learning from the process. I thought I was at a good place. But then I had I spoke with Kate, who's my coach, and she reworded things and reorganized things and was able to give me a different perspective, which was very helpful. I also think I am not technologically savvy, and so it took me forever to create my diagram, and I was really proud of it. But then when I saw what Kate did, I realized that there was a much better way of doing it. But it was really helpful to have her, because I can't do that kind of thing on my own, and so that was very helpful in the process of actually creating the final, well, hopefully what will be the final driver diagram that will go into the charter that we're handing in a couple weeks. So, and not only with the technological part was she helpful, but also in terms of the thinking of the secondary drivers and as well as the change ideas. So having her, I think, is what really facilitated it for our.
That's great.
So,
this technological battle.
Comment from Fred Joffe, Joffe, coach for the Salvation Army. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I'd like to talk a little bit about
hash brown. I don't think I got
drivers.
Go ahead, Fred.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd like to talk a little bit about the driver's diagram and what it boils down to. So let me say that the driver's diagram basically is set to ultimately lead to the one family we're working with right now getting into a job that will move the family out of poverty. And stepping back one from that, we want to get an initial job which may not move them out of poverty, but may move them towards getting out of poverty. So there really are two jobs here. One, an initial job, and one, a job which will move them out of poverty. Stepping back another level, we will try to develop a hope that this really can be accomplished through the pathways of hope and that person has started the pathways of hope with the Salvation Army. But the other part is skill development. And skill development requires two things. Number one, finding an employer that needs a skill that we believe the target family person can develop. So this requires going out and finding a for-profit organization that will, in fact, need someone of the type that we think our person can develop the skill to meet that need. So stepping back one more, there are two parts of this. One is the pathway of hope, which is a standard way that Salvation Army helps people. It gives them a feeling that they can, in fact, do it, you might say, perhaps with coaching and based on the principles of the Salvation Army. The other part of it is getting this person into skill development, and we are not there yet. We are working to get a job by contacting potential employers, and at the same time, we are working to get a skill development program that will match that. So that's kind of where we are on our whole plan, and what we really need to get going on is both the employer and the skill necessary to meet that employer's need.
Thank you, Lord.
Okay, that's it. Up and out.
Thanks, Fred. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
So like,
so maybe.
Go ahead.
Pardon me? Oh, so maybe one more thing, and that is for the meeting on the 29th. It looks like we need to get going fast because there's a lot of things required on the 29th for the charter that we haven't accomplished yet. Boy, it sounds like it's very, very aggressive for us to be able to do that. You know, we need we have you might say, a baseline measurement analysis, and that is the first thing. It's not quantitative, but the first thing is get the skill development and the potential employer identified, and that's going to be a challenge by that period of time. As I look at the charter, we've got a lot to do. The second thing is getting a storyboard for that meeting, and you know, right now that's pretty limited, but hopefully the storyboard will tell you know, where we are in the process and where we ultimately want to be. Okay, so those are aggressive measures, you might say, by the 29th.
Well, we appreciate you continuing to work on them, and I'm sure this is an experience that many teams have, which is that the creation of the charter is it can feel like a lot of work, and indeed it is a lot of work. And the intention in doing it and taking the last 3 months or so to do it has been to do some understanding of our systems and to get really focused.
Yes.
I think that each team probably needs to be moving at its own pace, and while we do have an intention that everybody would be completing their charters at the end of this month, for some teams it may take a little longer, and I'm okay with that, so long as the teams are learning and really going on a journey of discovery and figuring out what the important sort of leverage points are in their systems and what the important sort of way forward will be for them. So I think it's going to be an experience where we're going to be spread out along a continuum, with some teams that are really ready to go on November 29th, and others that are saying, you know, I need a little more time to get that driver diagram done, or to do that baseline data analysis or whatever. And I think that's okay.
Great to hear.
Yeah. I think we're really, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was about the driver diagram. This is Noelle Byer from Neighborhood Allies.
Yes, welcome.
Hello. I just wanted to say that I found it super useful. And some of the different tools, you know, I was a bit skeptical when we first learned about this really helps, you know, and going through the process of creating the driver diagram to think about stuff in a different way. And I've actually even, for my own, you know, purposes, started other ones to help wrap my head around the basic, you know, bare bones definitions of poverty, and maybe, you know, the drivers of that, like as far as, you know, physical needs of survival and self-worth and contribution to society, you know, but also, you know, to look at preventative services. I just wanted to say that I found it surprisingly helpful. I did. I liked it a lot.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that, and certainly I think I'd love to see what you've created for the broader picture of poverty, and that's just fantastic. That's great. Any other comments, or you guys are surprising me with your with all this wonderful stuff that you're coming up with?
Actually, Brandon, this is Tony with Cincinnati Works. I also found that to be very helpful, to actually look at the process that we have in place, and then it really forced me to look at what could be some barriers within our own process. So I thought it was great, and with the help of Bob Waterman, he is our new coach. He's been extremely helpful as well, and really looking at maybe even revamping the aim statement, so to speak, kind of making that more specific. So I felt like it was a very useful, helpful exercise.
Wonderful. Well, Tony, I'm so glad to hear that. That's wonderful. Well, let's take a quick look at a couple of examples, and we can continue to reflect on our creation of these things. And certainly, if there are questions or people said, "Oh, you know, I struggled with that too," then we can sort of address those at that time. But just as a reminder, there's sort of 4 major steps for how we make one. Certainly, the first one is around gathering information on our system and what the sort of data has to say about how our system works and if it's functioning in practice. And so that's something that we spent some time doing, building the process maps and asking you to look at what baseline data you might have available to you already. And then we asked you to sort of reflect on both your experiential knowledge and any sort of knowledge that might be available to you in the professional literature or from visits to colleagues who might be working on similar things. And then in step 3 and 4, you decide on what to sort of on a process to complete it. So getting everybody together and making sure you have your aim statement written and all of that. And then negotiating with each other as to what the leverage points are and what the ideas are that are going to make the difference in the future. And I think what we'll see today, again, and what we'll see certainly in a couple of weeks when we're together in person, is the driver diagram that we have built needs to happen to make the difference. And as a result, in the future, we're going to start taking portions of it, particular ideas off of it, and we're going to try them in practice for a week with a family, for a couple of weeks with 2 families, whatever it is. And we're going to then revise our theory. We're going to revise our driver diagram. And so we're going to go from a current best guess to an evidence-based theory of practice improvement over the next year. And so there is this issue of revise frequently. And so we'll talk about that more, of course, in person. But this is version 1.0, and we are very excited. I have been this week very excited to review version 1.0 for everybody. And it's been a real joy to see what you all are creating. But if we click forward 1 slide, just as a reminder of what a driver diagram looks like, and all of you know this now, so I won't dwell on it too much, but we have our aim, our drivers, secondary and primary, and those really represent what needs to change and where in the system change is needed, and then the change ideas themselves, how we plan to make a difference, how we plan to change the system in order to get a different result out of the outcome. And if we click forward 1 more slide, we had several misconceptions that we addressed when we talked about these previously, and there were sort of mistakes that are common that teams make when they're first getting started. And so if we click through on this, we see treating primary and secondary drivers like aim statements. And I think the solution here is to describe the driver simply as a noun, as something that can move in any direction. And I think most of you did a great job on that, as we'll see in just a moment when we look at a few examples. So I was really pleased to see that. Describing secondary measures at secondary drivers, I apologize for the typo there, really need to fix that, at too high a level. And so I think that's something that we had a little bit of mixture on, was how specific were we getting. So the solution for that is to ask ourselves the question, and we can kind of click forward 1. Yeah, is to, could we take direct action on this moment in time or this particular process step in our day-to-day work? And if we can't take direct action on it, then we probably need to drill down a bit further to get to something. And then a third mistake that we often see is being too vague in the description of change ideas. And we'll see that in some cases we have been a little too vague, and in other cases where we're very, very specific. And so we'll look at an example of a team that got very specific with their change ideas. And so as I reviewed the driver diagrams that were submitted, I really looked at it through the lens of 3 or 4 things. And if we click to the next slide, these are the things that that I was looking for. One is the aim clear and concise? So because the driver diagram incorporates the aim statement, I'm still going back to that as a real anchor point for setting direction and setting boundaries on where we plan to take action. And so and I'm looking for that to be real clear, and ideally, is there a measure contained within it that we might be able to sort of objectively say if we're making progress toward that measure. And so we're going to talk more about that today when we get into measurement, but that was something I looked for. Another thing that I was looking for are the primary and secondary drivers representative of the structures, processes, or norms that we spoke about when we described them on our previous call, and as they're described in the article that was made available. And are they represented as things that can be moved one direction or the other? You know, that's important for us. And so then I'm also looking for the secondary drivers to represent the where in the system a change can be made. So the actionable moment in time when you could do something differently. And then are the ideas for change specific enough that a team will know precisely what action they might try to take on the system. And so those are going to be the things I'm going to be looking out for. And I'm going to show you 3 examples, and I'm going to focus in on an element of the driver diagram for each of these. And certainly I would invite you to reflect with me if you've had a similar experience or we're struggling as well. And so these come directly from our work, and the first one is from Freestore Food Bank and Cornerstone Renter Equity Driver Diagram, which is real nice and, you know, beautiful visually. So nice to see that, very clear and easy to read. And what I want to focus on for Freestore is just let's take the lens of the aim statement. So if we click once, I've blown up the aim statement so we can see that a little bit more clearly. And it reads, the partnership between Freestore Food Bank and Cornerstone Renter Equity seeks to improve quality of life through self-sufficiency and employment opportunities with an increase in the net annual income of 5 Cornerstone families by 5% by February 2018 through the utilization of job training programs and wraparound services. And this is a fairly lengthy aim statement, and it's got a lot of information in it. And I think when I first read this, what my first thought was is that while it is specific, it falls into a couple of traps that we want to sort of be aware of and free ourselves up from. And the most important for me is this word by. So by February 2018, and then through the utilization of job training programs. So everything after the word through represents a theory of practice improvement. It represents the how we think we're going to make the difference with the families with whom we work. And from the perspective of quality improvement, we always want the theory to be fungible. We always want it to be flexible, because whatever point we're starting out as, we don't yet know which ideas will be successful. We have opinions, we have perhaps some evidence, but we often, when we're building a theory of practice improvement, we have a situation where we have not yet improved the system using the ideas that we are putting down on paper. And so in the absence of that empirical knowledge, we're really in a space where we're taking a best guess. And if we lock in on one set of ideas and they don't work for us, then we're sort of stuck. So what we like to do is we like to move that information to the theory portion of the diagram, which is the drivers and the specific change ideas, where they could be tested in practice If they work, fantastic. Then we've generated evidence and empiricism for our theory. If they don't, then we've put ourselves in a position for learning where we can adjust our theory. And so they are not then the centerpiece of our aim statement. Rather, they make up what should be the theory that follows the aim statement. So to that end, what does make up the aim statement is exactly the outcome that we're interested in. So if we click once, I think we'll see this highlighted. But right in the middle of the aim statement here for Free Store Food Bank and Cornerstone Renter Equity, we see this beautiful portion of a sentence: increase to the net annual income of 5 Cornerstone families by 5% by February 2018. To me, this is everything. This is the destination. This is exactly what we're interested in. And so this, to me, is the aim that we want to sort of hone in on and make very, very concise. And then everything else then becomes things that can inform the boundaries of our system and that can inform what is a part of our theory. And should job training not work for some reason or for some people, then we could learn that. We could test that in practice and we could try something else. But the idea here is there might be multiple avenues, multiple ways to get to a net annual income increase. And so that would be something that we would want to have a comprehensive theory for. But the aim itself is right there. So let me pause there for a second and allow any reflections or thoughts about that. But does that make sense? That the more concise portion of the aim is really the outcome of interest with the embedded sort of measure for understanding. Okay, well, let's take a look at the next example, and we'll keep moving forward. And as you reflect, feel free to ask questions and so forth. This next example comes to us from the First Step Home, and in this instance, again, we've got a beautiful driver diagram, nice display here, very easy to sort of read. And what I want to focus on this time is the primary drivers and the primary drivers. And here, if we click once, I think I've made them a little bit bigger for us. And what we want to do is we want to see how we could make them as clear as possible. And so for me, the first question I always look for is within each driver, can I identify either a structure, a process, or a norm, or a cultural attribute, if you will, of the system that requires change in order to achieve the aim that is stated. And so what I've done is I've gone through each of these and I've either identified the type of driver or have asked a question for which, as an outsider, I don't yet have knowledge. But it's a question that I think all of us could be asking of ourselves and of our own driver diagram. So if we click once, we'll look at, let's see if we can click once on this slide. Yeah, perfect. So the first driver there is increase identification / enrollment of IOP clients. And to me, what's very clear is that there is 2 processes, or at least one process that does 2 things in place. But it is clear that it's a process. So there's an identification process for clients, and there's an enrollment process for clients. And if we put those things down as elements of the system that require change, we need to be real clear if those are the same process or if they are different processes. Because if they're different processes, then they may require different change ideas in order to make them more efficient or more reliable or better in some way. And so that would be an example there of like, maybe we should have 2 drivers here instead of 1, but it is very clear that they're processes to me. The next one, it says improve client education and training. And to me, there are two things again here that are embedded. The structure is knowledge. So anytime we're talking about education, we're talking about what I would call an intangible structure, which is the presence or absence of knowledge in a person. And in this case, for a client. And so we're asking, you know, does the client have this particular set of knowledge or do they not? And as such, if they don't, then we might have a set of ideas about how to change the nature of knowledge that they have or don't have. And the second thing here is the process of training. So training is a process. Whenever we train somebody, whenever we go through that, we're asking somebody to move through a set of steps in order to learn how to accomplish a particular set of activities. And so training involves some preparation, some curriculum design, some sort of execution, whether it's in a classroom or on the job. It requires sometimes rework on the part of the trainee alongside the trainer. So there's multiple steps, and we can build a process around that training and then seek to understand where in that process of training either things are working well or they're not working well, and figure out the ideas that would then be important to fixing that. So here again, we have the potential for two different drivers, and the question then becomes for the team, does that make sense, and should we separate those, or do we keep them the same? Do we think about the knowledge structure being embedded inside the training process, and which of those two are we really focused on? The third one here, remove barriers to employability. If I click on that one, it's tough. It's tough. Is this a process or structures? And again, this is where we want to become more clear to ourselves and others. To remove barriers suggests potentially a process, that there might be some formal set of work, some formal step-by-step actions that we take in order to actively remove barriers from a person's life that prevent them from being employed. The other thing is to think of the barriers themselves as intangible structures, something that is itself a thing that is in the way. And so if they are structures, then they are sort of inherently part of the system. We think about how we could remove them from the system for all time. And again, because I don't work directly with First Step Home on this, I'm not exactly sure if it is like a set of steps of work that's meant to identify unique barriers for each person and then actively work to remove those barriers, or whether there is a set of common barriers that the organization would be seeking to sort of move out of the way for people seeking employment. And so that would be something we want to focus on getting clear, as those things can be slightly different. And then the ideas, of course, to do them would be slightly different. The fourth one here, identify client supports. Again, sort of like barriers, is it a process or structure? So is there a formal structure, a formal set of steps, day-to-day work for identifying unique supports per client? Or are there a set of common supports that exist, for example, in the community for which the organization wants to, say, connect clients to or make them aware of or whatnot? And so that becomes an important conversation to get clear on. Is there a formal set of steps or a process that we're developing, or structure that we're trying to identify there? The last one, increase employment rate for graduating women. And here we have, I would say, a question as to whether this is a process. Do we have a step-by-step process for employing or gaining meaningful employment for graduating women? Or is this a secondary aim? Is this like a sub-aim, if you will, that really needs its own build-out, its own sort of thought process around that? And so anytime we see words like increase, decrease, we want to be clear that about whether or not we are really setting ourselves up for a second sub-project, or whether that's actually a particular process or set of steps or something that we're working on. All right. So let me pause right there and just allow you to reflect a little bit, and certainly any questions you have, be happy to answer. But this idea of quickly and easily being able to identify the process forms, is that helpful for you, I guess, and would that help you to get clearer in your own driver diagrams?
It's good to hear these questions, you know, in terms of our secondary drivers. We appreciate the feedback.
Great. I'm assuming this is somebody from First Step Home talking.
Yes, it's Rachel from First Step Home. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So I think Rachel, one thing I will say, since you are on the call, is it's a great version 1.0. Version 1.0. These are things that are investigative. It's helpful to have you think through them because have an impact. Ideas you choose to move forward with and to try out with the people that you serve.
You know, this is Fred Jaffe again.
Yep.
And I'm wondering whether our drivers are strong enough. If I look at the long-term goal of getting 5,000 families out of poverty, first of all, what does that really mean, out of poverty? Is it for a family of two, let's say a single parent and a child, 20,000, or is it really $40,000? And my second question is, well, out of poverty, whatever that is it realistic for the kind of work, the kind of skill development, and the kind of work that might be involved? For example, suppose we have skill development and the job that we can get the person into earns, let's say, $12 or $13 an hour. Pretty good. That really only gets us to maybe at 2,000 hours, $20,000 to $25,000 a year. So then what it really means is that
their team members are all going to free board now through the priority line. Also,
can I go ahead?
Military personnel.
Go ahead, Fred. I think we've got somebody at an airport somewhere.
Oh, okay. So what I wonder is, you know, first of all, what does out of poverty mean? Can we go back and redefine that, and then look at our drivers and see how realistic are they relative to that goal?
I agree. This is Noelle. I agree with that whole definition of what it means to, first of all, be in poverty, and then what it means to get someone out of poverty. Because I find that there's a family of 5 I know right now that makes $2,300 a month, which they only get $50 in food stamps. They're very close to being out of poverty, but their quality of life and you know, system of the way that they live and things like that, they are often running out of basic needs. They are absolutely, you know, feeling the self-sufficiency areas of poverty, even though the monetary amount doesn't really seem like they should be that bad off. And so I think that definition piece has been hard for me too.
Right. Okay.
So Noelle and Fred, I appreciate that reflection. That's one that I share. I think that's an ongoing discussion for the CPC, and it makes me anxious as well, as somebody who does a lot of quality improvement work. Without a solid operational definition, it's difficult to develop a strong theory of practice improvement. And so there are 2 things at work. One, I think, is we have some ongoing negotiations around that, and ideally I would like to have a clear definition for this collaborative to you very soon. I think that's why we still have that placeholder on that slide, and why I keep coming back to it. The second thing here, of course, is that each individual organization has a a theory of practice improvement for how they aim to help families living in poverty. And in particular, I think what we're noticing is that there is for many organizations, the contribution that they feel like they can make really is around the stability of families. I think moving the needle on, say, raising families well above the federal poverty line is, as I said at the start of the call, very ambitious, very aggressive timeline, very ambitious goal. But I would say that moving the needle on stability might be something that we can learn a lot about and do.
Right. And, sort of as I said before, I feel like, going back to maybe finding out what the very bare bones kind of drivers of poverty are, and kind of figuring out, because each of us have an area of expertise for, maybe it might be the contribution to society part or the meeting basic needs. And of course, might be a little far ambitious, but the federal poverty guidelines, I feel, are in desperate need of revision. I mean, all of the systematic, computer, the way they communicate with each other, the way they record keep, I think that a lot of it starts there. And so are we allowed to even, as maybe a county, take on a different approach for measuring and delegating, different benefits and whatnot?
I don't know the policy implications there, Noelle, but I can appreciate the need for policy revisions, although I think we may not be the right people, have the right power to do that at a federal or national level. But
if we work together, we can do anything, I'm just putting it out there, if anybody wants to run with it, because
I do think realistically, though, we can think critically about two issues. One is the stability that families experience in their day-to-day lives. And I do see the vast majority of organizations who are part of one-to-one doing that. I don't know of one that isn't, to be quite honest. And then the second thing is while there might be some given definitions of poverty provided, say, by the federal government, those do not necessarily reflect our unique understanding of the local environment in Cincinnati and what is livable, what is a wage or an income that is livable for families. And so I think
absolutely
focus our work around the livableness. We can what the federal government says may be a line in the sand, so to speak. But we understand that families live along a continuum. And I think our if I had to set a long-term vision, our long-term vision is to move families along that continuum to an increasingly more stable place. And so I think, but that is an ongoing discussion we need to continue to have. And I think I'm very happy to continue that conversation. I heard somebody agreeing, and happy to invite anybody else to make a comment.
Well, I think that's very, very helpful, Brandon, because number one, getting a clearer definition of what constitutes getting out of poverty would be very, very helpful, and I hope the overall coalition can help that. Number two, I think your idea of getting out of poverty means family stability for all members, I think is a very good way of looking at out of poverty. For example, having enough income so that you will not undergo the possibility of losing your housing. Number two, having enough to feed your child well, including perhaps the use of a free store or whatever, but nevertheless, having enough food is very important. Number three, having the attitude that the child will attend school on a regular basis, it would be, I think, helpful to family stability, and I consider that a step on the way to getting out of poverty. So your idea of family stability, number one, and number two, getting a clearer definition of what the collaborative means on getting out of poverty would really be very, very helpful. But that's very encouraging what you said.
But we'll keep pressing forward, and let's continue these discussions as we go and as our understanding develops. Let's continue with the driver diagrams for just a second. I want to take one more example and show it to you before we move on to a family of measures. And this comes to us from St. Joe's Valley Interfaith St. Joseph. This is their driver diagram 1.0. And what I want to focus for a second on is their secondary drivers and change ideas. And so I've sort of tried to blow that up as best I could, or I just took a subset of it because it's relatively complex. So this is just the first 3 secondary drivers and then a set of change ideas. And I want to highlight for you all a couple of things that I thought was a good practice that I saw here in this particular driver diagram. Each of the secondary drivers feels like or sounds like a place in the system, an actionable moment in time when I could do something different. So the recruitment process, the planning process, the data gathering, I'm going to say process, even though that's not present there. These are actual moments in time. And so if you click once, Simone, we're going to see here that is moments in time where you could do something differently. And then next to that, if we start to look at some examples, if we click one more time, we'll see examples of change ideas that are very, very specific. So if I look at recruit from active St. Joseph families living in Valley Interfaith service area rather than recruiting from Valley Interfaith client base, that is something I could try out. I could try that out for a day or a week. I could try it out for the next family I choose to recruit. That's something I could get real specific on. Weekly email check-ins between agencies. Yeah, that's something I could try out for a week or 2 weeks or even a month, and then make a decision as to whether that assists the planning process or does not. And I can make an assessment of that based on people's experiences. And so that becomes an actionable idea, something that can be tested in practice. If it works, fantastic. If it doesn't, we can abandon it and move on to some other idea. And then thirdly, down here, group members complete each other's spending tool assessments in pairs. I don't know what the social dynamics of that would be and whether or not it would work well or how it would work, but I have a bunch of learning questions about that, and I can try it out. I can try it first as a simulation, a couple people in the office. I could try it with a couple of group members just one time. I don't necessarily have to implement that forever and always. I can try it before I buy it, so to speak. I can kind of really give it a go for a couple of sessions, learn about how to make it work well, or learn that it doesn't work well and abandon it. And I think in the formulation of our change ideas, this is what we want to get to. We want to get to very, very specific ideas that can be applied at specific moments in time, and then we can gather evidence, information as to whether they work in practice. And so I thought this was a nice example of a team that got very specific on many of their change ideas here. Okay. Right. So that's if I click one more time, that just gets us back to what we look for. And so these are the things that as you consider version 1.1 or 2.0 or 3.0 of your driver diagrams, that I'd love for you to take up. These are the questions that I take up whenever I look at a driver diagram, whenever I'm working with a team. And the intention is to get very clear all the way through from the outcome of interest all the way to the specific actions we could take in the day-to-day space where the work occurs, and really get very clear on all of those things, so that when we do start to try things for the first time, the second time, we can learn whether or not they're effective. And that's really the intention here in building a driver diagram, is to give us that sort of guide for learning. That's going to guide our learning questions and going to guide our refinement of our theory and practice. Good. Any final reflections on the driver diagram before we move forward into developing our measurement tree?
We'll encounter is the difficulty in finding enough employers who are willing to hire our clients at wage level, which moves the needle forward pretty well. I think that jobs consistent with the abilities of our trained people are going to be a barrier for the long term.
Well, there are some systemic policy-based issues and some other things that are in place there, and that will be tough. That's why we're here. We're here to try to figure that out, and this year we're trying to figure out what we can do given those barriers, and that's going to be the learning journey that we're on. And I'm excited for it. I'm excited to see what we can accomplish.
Well, that may be something that the leaders of the collaborative could help us with in knowing the employers, the large employers perhaps, who might have jobs available or are willing to take our trained people to do work.
Who was this speaking?
Oh, this is Fred Joffe. I'm working with Salvation Army.
Okay, this is Noel. I would like to chat, maybe a little later today or later in the week.
Please stow
I have some great
laptop
ideas
computers under the
that
seat
could
in
help.
front of you.
I'm getting two voices at the same time. Please repeat what you said.
I said, let's talk afterward later today if possible. I have some ideas, and I'm aware of some places, that we could kind of collaborate to help get people to and through the interview process and all that stuff.
That's great. What's your name and your contact number?
It's Noel, N-O-E-L. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
My cell phone, 513-324-2966.
2966. I'll give you a call later on today.
Thanks.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much, Noel.
Yeah, glad to see we're making some connections. This is fantastic.
Right.
Well, let's move forward to our next deliverable, which is the measurement tree. And I wanted to walk you through an example of what it is and how we can make one in practice. And so I want to start off with its purpose. The purpose of measurement for improvement in any of our work in any of our organizations, in my mind, is to provide usable information for improving the process represented in our working theory. And toward that end, there's three things that we need to focus on. So if we click once, we'll consider what is measured. So we want whatever we're measuring to be closely aligned with the actual work of improvement. That's important for us, so that we're not measuring things that are inappropriate or unnecessary. The second thing we want to focus on is how and when it's measured. So ideally, anytime we're collecting data, we want that data to be embedded in the daily workflow in which we're engaged. We're all very busy people, and measurement is not a free thing. And so as long as it can be a regular part of the work, and it doesn't seem, it's not an extra thing, it's not like an on top of thing, then people are more likely to engage in it successfully. And then the third thing that we look at is the social process. So ideally, we want the use of information that we collect, the data that we collect, to be used transparently. So we want people to have access to it. We want it to be available and visible. Also, though, we want, even as we cultivate transparency, to be in a low stakes environment. We don't want people to feel judged by the data that is being collected. Our intention is to learn from data and then to improve the system. Our intention is not to collect data, learn from it, and then judge the workers or the people who we're serving or whatever in some sort of negative light. And so we want people to feel safe, to take risks, to improve the system, and to use data as a guide in doing so. And so these are three things that we're going to focus on. And I want to kind of show you how we might develop a family of measures that's close to the work, how it might be measured, and that would allow us to then make progress. So I want to give you a real life example. This comes out of the field of education, and it's a great one. And the case here is for improving the 4-year college going rate. And so I want to just quickly show you a driver diagram, and Simone, you can kind of click through. That's perfect. Just wait right there for a second. Yep. So the aim here is to increase the 4-year college going rate from 66% to 90%. And there are some primary drivers here and some secondary drivers. And if we click again, I want to focus on just one of the secondary drivers. Oh, looks like I got my animations mixed up. My apologies. I want to focus on the FAFSA completion process. So for anybody who has children who are getting ready to or going to university or college of some type, you'll be familiar with the FAFSA completion process. But the FAFSA process is the federal student aid program. And any person in the United States who would like to receive some financial support in the form of grants or loans in the United States needs to complete this process, this application, in order to access different forms of funding if you're not just going to pay cash out of pocket. So it's something that's real important, particularly for people who are coming from a low socioeconomic status background. And in this particular district where they decided to work on this issue, they identified it as a high leverage process for improving the college going rate. And so I want to show you just for a second what that process looks like. And so if we click through, you can click quickly through this just until the slide fills all the way up. And I'm not going to go through all of the steps here because we're not actually trying to improve the FAFSA process in Cincinnati at the moment, but keep going, keep clicking. It just keeps going and keeps going and keeps going. And what you can see here, and one more, and then that's it. So what you can see here is that the FAFSA process is a very complicated one. There's multiple steps where different documents are used. There's multiple decision points. Parts of it are done on paper. Parts of it are done online. Parts of it need to be completed by parents. Parts of it need to be completed by students. And as a result, if you are coming from a home where English is a second language, where you're coming from a low socioeconomic background, a low educational background, or you may be coming from a family where your parents are undocumented, you may be in a situation where completing this particular application is very difficult. If you're coming from a family where access to the internet is very difficult, then it may be nearly impossible to complete this process. And as a result, it's really unfortunate, but lots of students don't end up completing it and are not able then to access financing for going to college. And so what we wanted to do is we wanted to learn something about this process, and in particular where it breaks down and where we might want to target our ideas for improvement. And so we wanted some measures that could help with that. So if you click once, you'll see some red circles with M's embedded. And these are some checkpoints along the way where it was relatively easy to collect data on whether or not that step is completed. And so if we click one more time, we should see, a set of process step measures. So we have a single process, the FAFSA process, and we have a set of step measures here. And each one of these is something that we could understand the flow of the process and whether or not it's working well in practice. And so we have all of that available to us, and we can look at that critically. And so these steps, if they're not working, we could take direct action. We could take direct action. We can come up with change ideas. We could test them in practice in order to improve the system. So if we click forward, we can start to use these process step measures to build what I like to call a measurement tree. So if we build the measurement tree, here are the 6 measures from the FAFSA process. We understand that each of these is really critically important and that we would want to get a high percentage who get their FAFSA ID, high percentage of students who have more than one application developed, high percentage who submit their applications to the federal government, and so forth and so on. These steps culminate in what I would call the FAFSA. If you click once there, you can get the percent completing the FAFSA application. So if you make it through all these steps, then you successfully complete the FAFSA application. And we believe very strongly if you can complete the FAFSA application, if we could get most students to complete the FAFSA application, then we would get to the outcome. So if you click one more time, we would get to a place where we might see an increase in enrollment in four-year colleges and universities. But that's not the whole picture. If you remember, at the beginning, we had a driver diagram where FAFSA was just one secondary driver, and there was lots of other secondary and primary drivers. So if you click again, and again, and again, you'll see that there are lots of opportunities based on the theory of improvement that we have developed to understand if and where the theory is being successful. So we can look at the percentage of students who complete one or more college applications. Turns out there's good evidence that if you complete more than 4 college applications, you're very likely, more than 95% likely, to go on to attend a four-year university. If you complete less than 4, you have a much diminished chance of that. We can look at the average of college applications completed by student. We can look at the percentage of students who are finishing 9th grade with either a D or F. That turns out to be extremely predictive of whether or not somebody will go on to college or university at the end of their high school career. We can look at the graduation rate. We can look at a variety of different things here. What you can see is that very quickly there is both a lot of data that's available to us to understand the improvement journey, and there could be an overwhelming amount of data. And so what becomes important then is to prune the tree, so to speak, to focus on the things that are either high priority, high evidence, or that we have a very high degree of belief in that we could work on. For example, some high schools have a student population that does not come from a low socioeconomic status background, and the FAFSA completion problem may not exist for them. And so we might choose to not focus on that area and instead focus on the graduation rate or the 9th grade pass rate. These would be some things. Each of these represents opportunities for measurement and learning in the improvement journey. If we click one more time, we also have something we call a balance measure. And balance measures represent some aspect of the system that we're not focused on improving, but that we think might be affected adversely or positively by the work we're doing. And so we might want to include those as well. So if I click forward one slide, or go ahead and click through. Let me pause right here. Yeah, so we have, no, it's okay, go ahead. Go ahead, one. Yep. So a measurement tree is made up of different types of measures. At the top of the tree, we've got our outcome measure. That's the thing that we care about. It usually flows directly from our aim statement. And it's the thing that we're trying to move the needle on. It's the thing that we'd like to see be better for the people whom we serve. And just below the outcome, if we click, we have process measures. And so these have to do with understanding the day-to-day work that we do. If a process is getting better, then we have a strong theory, a strong degree of belief that the outcome will get better. And generally, outcomes lag behind processes because the process represents the day-to-day work. The outcome represents the culmination of multiple processes working together in order to get that defined outcome of some sort. Process measures can be broken down further into process step measures. And those are important because they represent the individual steps where we might take action and do something differently. And if we click again, the steps are where we can run PDSA cycles. So if I have a client identification process, or I have a client enrollment process, or I have a client intervention process, that process might be made up of 10 or 15 steps. And I might identify one of those steps, or two of those steps, or three of those steps, or the time between the step as being the place in the system where change is needed. And as we'll soon learn at the end of the month, it's at that moment in time when I'm going to use the Plan, Do, Study, Act cycle and the model for improvement to learn how to improve the system. So the process step, where the rubber meets the road, why we asked you all to make process maps for the work that you do. And identifying the measures then allows us to see when we're making a change, whether or not that change is successful in practice. So if you click a couple more times, we see sort of unfolding conceptually the idea that we might run multiple cycles, first starting with one client or for one day or for 1 week. And as our evidence grows, as our degree of belief grows that the change could result in improvement, we might then scale up to more clients or for a longer period of time. We could make adjustments to how we choose to do things. And ultimately, we end up with a scenario where we can make a permanent change to business as usual that results in improved performance for the process and improved performance for the outcome. Okay. So if we click again, sometimes it starts off very small, and if you keep clicking, we move from starting off with sort of anecdotal evidence and belief about what might work to improve the system to eventually getting to a place of quantitative impact for the people that we serve. So if we click a couple more times, we'll see how that can continue for the whole process as a whole. Okay, so let's click again. And this is the measures themselves, I would say, can be informed by our theory. So not every driver will produce a measure, and not all measures need to be located on your driver diagram. But using your driver diagram as a starting place for conversation can be a very, very helpful place for identifying possible measures to include in your family of measures or your measurement crew. The other place that can be really helpful, as we saw in the example, is your process map. So your process map can help you to identify the measure at the end of the process measure, as well as the process step measures, the measures that might be contained within the process that would allow you to understand how individual steps or moments in time in the system are functioning. So if we click ahead. So our deliverable then is to use our driver diagrams as a guide, and feel free to use our process maps as well as any data we already have that we think is important to include, and to identify outcome measures, process step measures, and so on. That would be really, really helpful. And this is kind of hard. This is hard to do if we're not used to thinking about measurement, if we're not used to thinking about data. But this information becomes absolutely critical for understanding if and when improvement is occurring in our systems. And without it, what we are left with is falling back on our beliefs, which can be good, but is usually not good enough to demonstrate empirically that a change is an improvement and has occurred. So what we'd like you to do is start thinking about this. I don't expect any team to have a fully developed family of measures by the time we all get together in a couple of weeks. But if you have a version 1.0 that we can refine, add to, subtract from, and change on that day, then I would be very, very grateful. And our hope is to create some time and space for teams to work on that in person. And to continue to refine it in person. But this is what we'd like you to start to begin to develop. Let me pause there and ask for any questions or clarifications, because it was a bit of a lightning round there to cover all that in detail. Okay, well, that's going to be our measurement tree version 1.0. Certainly, if you do have any questions, we are here to answer them, and I think our coaches will be happy to think about what really helpful for driving the improvement journey for your team. But if we click through a couple slides.
I have a question.
Yes.
And my question is, you know, this entire process that we're going through, the training, I mean, by the time we're finished, so I know you have some certification in this process, in process training. So for us who are going through this and are using our project, what kind of level is it? Are we, when we complete this entire process, would you say like we're on a level 1 in terms of our process certification training? You just kind of get where I'm at, where I'm going?
Yes, I do. Yeah, that's a good question. So there are some formal organizations that actually do formally certify people in the use of quality improvement tools and knowledge. We are not, we're not actively certifying individuals or organizations through this collaborative. However, what I would say is that as you move through this, and the successful sort of completion of a project would have given you the experience and the knowledge to probably achieve one of those early certifications. And there are many different types. They go by different names. But if that's something you're interested in, I'd be more than happy to direct you to the organizations and even help coach you on them if that's a desirable thing, if that's something you're interested in. Most notably,
right.
is the
right. I mean, because you knock out two birds that would you knock out two things at once. I just think maybe not now, but going forward, as we go forward in the process, or if there's a time when we bring other organizations into the collaborative, that this phase be somehow a part of a, you know, some sort of training module that would provide some entry level, you know, certification. So, you know, it becomes a benefit not only for our projects, but also to, you know, the facilitation of the process.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I'll speak with our leaders and see what's possible regarding that. But certainly, I think that the thing that immediately jumps to mind is that maybe a parallel process where we can help get people into a certification program where they could use their work as part of one-to-one as the sort of learning journey for that. And I think there's some good opportunities to do that through the American Society for Quality and perhaps some others. So we could look at that. Yeah. Thank you for that. It's a good idea. I'm going to put a note here. Certainly, many of our coaches will have been certified through either their employers or through some of these agencies, and also will have lots of ideas about that. Great. All right. We can click one slide forward, or Sloan, or maybe two. Maybe let's go two more. Yeah. So certainly, I just want to remind people of our deliverable timeline. And I just want to also celebrate for a second. You know, almost 3 months ago, this was all brand new and probably seemed very vexing and anxiety inducing. And now here we are, just a couple of weeks away from getting together again in person. And you all as teams have accomplished a great deal for your organizations and for your learning. And I'm exceptionally grateful that you've been willing to do that work, and hopeful that it has been valuable to you. and will continue to be valuable as we move the journey forward. But you really have done a ton. And when we get together in person, we want to spend some time celebrating that and reviewing our learning together. The storyboard is really just about visualizing all the work you've done. You know, it's about putting up a picture of the process map and of the driver diagram and of our aim statements and our data and all of that kind of stuff, so that we can see at a glance collectively what the learning has been for each organization. And so it shouldn't be difficult. There's nothing overly, should just be able to just sort of you draw upon and use the work that you've been doing over the last few months. So hopefully that won't be an intimidating thing to do. And so I'm very excited for us to get together. And the next slide, I think, just says when we're doing that. So if we click through, our next learning session is going to be on Wednesday, November 29th. And I'll ask Simone if she will chime in, if she's willing, to tell us, just remind us the times and the exact location, as I know that the United Way has been focusing heavily on getting all those logistical details in place. So do you have information on that?
Yeah, it is, let's see, from 8 to 4:30, I believe. I'm just getting confirmation here. Yep. And breakfast and lunch will be provided. It's over at the Cincinnati Hamilton County Community Action Agency on Langdon Farm. If anybody has any questions on how to get there, parking, anything, etc., feel free to email me.
Awesome. Well, that's brilliant. And we're very grateful to you, Simone, for being a point person for us and helping get everybody set up there.
No problem.
Any other questions or from folks? I saw a question come through from Maria. She wrote here, is the team charter due on the 27th? Not sure what the family of measures is that was shown on the last slide. And I just wrote back here for anybody who can't see the chart that we're asking people to develop or to start to develop a measurement tree as a representation of their family of measures. So a measurement tree has an outcome measure, it has process measures, it has some process step measures. It represents the information that we believe, based on the theory that we've developed and the process maps that we've made, the information that we will need to understand if and when we are improving on the outcome that we have set out to improve. And so for some of you, for many of you who have existing intervention pathways, that means gathering data on how those pathways are working, and then as you take action to change those pathways, noting the change in performance that happens. And we're going to learn some special tools for analyzing data in the future, but we're not going to do those just yet. And then the other thing is that for those who are developing something new, if you're developing a new intervention pathway, then the focus is on highlighting what are the measures that would allow you to understand if and when the intervention that you're creating is being successful in meeting the needs of the people whom you serve. And so that's where we're going to be focusing. As I said, we're just looking for version 1.0. It can be dirty, messy, incomplete. That's fine. We're gonna continue to work and refine those things going forward. Maria, to the other half of your question, when is the charter due? I think that the intention from our team at the United Way was to have the completed charters in hand when we get together in person. That is the week of November 27th. And I know for some teams that's a stretch because there's still work to be done to complete process maps and to complete baseline measurement analyses and so forth. And as we said, what we want teams to do is move at the speed that they are able and to really do the deep learning necessary to achieve the improvements that they want to see. For others, they may be able to move more quickly and have all of those things in hand. And so we're obviously going to be flexible with that. But whatever we do have completed, we'd love to be able to see so that certainly from a coaching perspective, we can know where to target our thoughts and comments and feedback and so forth. Any other final questions from folks before we let you go for the day?
Yeah, just one. You mentioned that the ultimate goal is not clear as to what getting out of poverty means. Any information that you can give us as to whether that's progressing towards real clear understanding would be very helpful, at least to me. And then the second thing is, boy, you've really helped today to get a much better understanding of exactly how to go through this, and we hope we can live up to the expectations.
Well, I appreciate that, and certainly we will do that, and that's something I'm continue to push our United Way folks on in terms of definition, and we will continue to work on that. And I want to make it a point that we circle back to this conversation on our outcome, certainly when we get together in person in just a couple weeks' time. So
that's great. Appreciate it.
And Simone has just noted for those who can't see the chat that the PowerPoint will be posted on Basecamp, and she can email anyone with it if requested to do so. So thank you, Simone, for that. That's super help to everybody.
What is Basecamp?
Basecamp, great question. Basecamp is a website, sort of a organization company that provides like an online platform for the sharing of all kinds of documents. And so when you have multiple organizations who are part of a project, they can set up a Basecamp site that would allow them to access information. It's sort of like Google Drive or Dropbox. But understand that many organizations, because of firewall issues, cannot access Google Drive. And so Basecamp allows you to do that. It allows you to, whatever your sort of email address is or whatever, you can still sign up for Basecamp and have access to all the information contained therein. And Amy created a Basecamp site for our work with one-to-one that contains all the deliverables, all the articles that we recommend for reading. Everything is available there.
Well, I don't know how I missed that, but could I have the link and stuff, please? That would be very, very helpful.
Absolutely, absolutely. Simone, I think we'd be happy to get that out to everybody.
Will do.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the question too. Very important that we communicate that. And Simone has just posted her email address for those who don't have it in the chat box, and she can ensure that you get any information you need from this call. Well, with that, I want to say thank you to everybody, and I wish you a fantastic a few days ahead and going into the Thanksgiving break. I hope that you all will have some time off to spend with loved ones, and very much look forward to seeing you again in person just after the break there, and wish you a good start to the holiday season. Have a great day.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.